In 1983, at just 17 years old, Bruce Lisker walked into his home and found his mother brutally murdered. Within hours, he went from a grieving son to the LAPD's prime suspect. Despite proclaiming his innocence, Bruce was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Bruce spent more than 26 years behind bars for a crime he did not commit. His conviction was ultimately overturned after revelations of flawed forensic testimony, investigative misconduct, and suppressed evidence that pointed away from him. His case has become one of the most troubling examples of wrongful conviction in Los Angeles history, exposing systemic failures in how police and prosecutors handled evidence. Today, Bruce shares his journey, not just of injustice and survival, but also of resilience and hope. His story is a reminder of both the human cost of wrongful convictions and the urgent need for reform. I'm Michael Semanchik, Executive Director of the Innocence Center, and you're about to hear Bruce Lisker on For the Innocent.
Spent most of my life in prison, chasing a dream called justice. Chasing a dream, chasing a dream. Won't somebody please hear my plea? Won't somebody please set me free?
I grew up in Sherman Oaks, California, and in 1983 I was wrongly arrested, tried, and convicted for the murder of my mom in our family home. And I served 26 years, 5 months, 3 days in California State Prison before I was exonerated and released in 2009. I had a planned job hunt. I was sort of on a perpetual job hunt. I wasn't very good at holding jobs, slightly better at getting them, but not great. And I had just a few days prior repaired the rear shock absorber on my car. And as I was driving along, I heard this banging towards the rear of the car. And I got out and looked, and the work that I'd done had come loose, and the shock was flopping around back there, and I needed to fix it before the shock or the car was damaged. So I went to my apartment, changed into my work clothes, and went over to my parents' house to do the job because my mom had a jack. And so when I got there, what would normally happen was I'd pull into the driveway and our little dog would start barking, and my mom would come out and investigate and say hi and see what I needed. I was going over there regularly for groceries and to have my laundry done and stuff anyway, even though I was living in my own apartment. I was a 17-year-old kid. So today she didn't come out. She normally would be like right out, and she didn't come out, and it wasn't that unusual. So I was organizing the stuff for the repair and sitting in my car, and then I went to the door. It was like, it's kind of long. I'd like to get the jack and get started. Knocked. I heard the dog inside, and I was like, if the dog is inside, she should be inside. Okay, maybe she's in the bathroom or something. Waited another 30 seconds, and then it's like, I'm just going to look inside. It's unusual at this point. You know, it's not like panic, but it's like, it's unusual. So I go start walking around the house, and from the back windows, I look in. And from the first window that I looked in, which was the living room window, I thought, but I wasn't certain, but I thought maybe that I had seen her feet on the floor. So then I went to another window, the dining room window, that I could confirm this because it was just bizarre. And I doubted it. The second that I thought that I saw it, I began to doubt it. This can't be, you know. And I was high that day too, I should add, adding to my sort of cognitive, you know, like I was most days. So, but at the second window, I definitely saw she was on the ground. I saw her head. She was laying on the floor inside. And I was just like, Jesus, you know, I got to get in. And I thought there's a spare key in this cabinet on the back patio. So I dove to that cabinet, got the key case out, and started opening it as I was returning to the front yard. But it was empty. It was just a couple steps, and I realized the key's gone. It's not in there. And I'm panicking now. Because when I left, I was like, you know, I'm independent. I'm on my own. I gave my key back. And so I didn't have my own key. And so I remembered how I'd gotten in when I was late for curfew and stuff when I was a kid. And that was at the kitchen window. I could take out a couple of these louvered panes from the window and I could climb in. It was easy to do because the frame was pretty loose and it was just, we didn't have like locks and alarms and stuff like nowadays. I started to take the screen off to get the 3 panes out, but the screens were tacked into place with brads because they'd become loose and fallen out over the years. And so I ran to the front yard and got a pair of pliers, ran back, took the brads out, set everything down, climbed in, and I found my mom. And just, it still gives me nightmares. It's not a scene that you could ever forget. She was clinging to life. When I found her, she was unconscious, laying almost face down, kind of on her left side on the entry floor, but she was breathing. She had 2 knives in her back, which I took out, gave first aid, pleading with her to say something to me, to tell me who had done this. Nothing. I called the police and I was frantic and screaming for help, and they arrived. They subdued me out in the front of the house. I was screaming, crying, screaming for the paramedics to get her to the hospital and help her, do something for her. And they arrested me. My mom was transported to Encino Emergency, and as I was sitting in the backseat of the police car handcuffed, and I was pleading with all the officers at the scene, anybody that within earshot, I want to go and be with my mom. I made 2 calls. I called for help and I called my dad to tell him what the hell was going on. He zoomed home from 12 miles away in Hollywood. His law office came home. And so he pulled up when I was in the back of the car. Can I take my son to the hospital? No. We're holding him for detectives. So the detective arrived. Can I go to the hospital? No. And they took me to Van Nuys. And they commenced an interrogation. It's different from an interview. An interrogation is when you believe you got the person. That was what it was from the word go. And it started at 1 p.m. and it was about an hour and a half, I think. And by the end of it, he found reason to have to arrest me. He basically said, tell me what happened from the moment you woke up this morning. And I did. And I ran through it all. And I was 100% truthful. By the end of it, he went, well, none of that fits, right? None of that works. I went to the scene. You couldn't see in the window like you said you did. Meanwhile, he got a call. He talked to his partner who remained at the scene. Monsu was the detective that was interviewing me, and Langren was his partner who remained at the scene. And they decided what they could poke holes in or whatever, And then he came back in and said, you're under arrest, and arrested me. And that was it. When they started to read me my Miranda rights, when you're under 18, asking for a parent is the functional equivalent of asking for an attorney. When they said, you have a right to an attorney, I said, my father. He raised his voice over mine and kept talking. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed. And I'm like, okay, kids are pretty adept, even in stressful situations like that, at what am I supposed to be doing? What am I, it was not okay for me to say anything other than listen and agree. And so he said, you're willing to talk to me? I was like, yeah, because you always think I could just tell them the truth. I'm telling the truth. If I just explain it a little more clearly, they'll see it and I'll go to the hospital and be with my mom. My mom died at 3:27 p.m. in emergency surgery at Encino Hospital. And my dad came to the police station and asked to talk with me and was allowed to. And they put us back in the interrogation room. And he told me that my mom had died. And it was just like the bottom fell out of my world. I mean, it was just the whole concept of death at 17 years of age, let alone after what I'd found and what had obviously happened to her. And now she's gone forever. My dad and I immediately were like, we want a lie detector test. We want a lie detector test right away. And he's, well, I think we could, manage that. And from 4 to 1 a.m., I was in the holding cell in the hallway. And then they took me downtown to Parker Center and gave me a polygraph. And in my case, I told 100% the truth, did not lie about a single thing. And the polygraph examiner said I exhibited deception on all questions and that I was lying. I was taken probably about 3 or 4 a.m. to Sylmar Juvenile Hall and dropped off by Detective Monsu. In hindsight, I can see how they definitely would have rushed a judge and gone, we need to take a look at this kid. I've said this in the past. Aaron Moriarty on 48 Hours asked me, well, shouldn't they have, looked at you? Of course he should have looked at me. I would have looked at me. They get a call of a stabbing and, kids frantic, and they arrive. I'm the only one there. I have long hair. Back in the day, you were either a druggie or you were a cop or you were a clueless citizen. There were only 3 boxes to put a person into, and, pot wasn't legal. And so I looked the part, I looked the part of a stoner. So they put me in that box. Shit. We got a long-haired kid at home with blood on his hands when we arrived because I was giving first aid, freaking out. And then when we start talking to neighbors, we find out that, they had problems. We heard them screaming, yelling all the time. But then when evidence of somebody else started coming up and coming into their radar, they shouldn't have locked in and locked out. They locked in on me and they locked out anything that ran counter to that initial gut instinct. And that's where they began to err. So Mike Ryan was somebody that I met in a 12-step program when I had my apartment, and he was homeless and he was looking for a place to stay, and I let him stay on the couch in my apartment in exchange for like a portion of the rent or some beer or some weed or whatever, it was those times. And he eventually didn't give me anything. So I was like, look, you got to go. So I kicked him out. And he went back to Gulfport, Mississippi. And I thought that was it. 4 days before the murder, he shows back up in town. And we thought he just decided to come back out. But what turned out to be the case was that he had had his probation transferred from some case that he had out there in Gulfport to California. He came out, never reported, absconded. He was AWOL. And then 4 days later, my mom was murdered and he took off again. And so people were telling my dad about this, and he asked me, and I initially went, Mike Ryan, because you never think, even I was so stupid and so blind. I was naive. I wasn't stupid, but I was naive thinking people are like me. They're not violent. They're not they would never kill anyone. And so it slowly dawned on us that he was violent. He was obsessed with knives. He had this throwing knife that he would throw into the walls of my apartment when he lived there. He would resolve things with threats of violence or violence itself. And so it became really clear that shit, and my dad told me something that I didn't know until then, which was the day before the murder, Mike Ryan showed up at the house. My dad's at work in Hollywood. Mike Ryan shows up at the house and asks for work he can do for money at the house. And my mom didn't have any, and she had someplace to go. So she was like, no, I don't have any money. I don't have anything. Sent him on his way. The day before the murder, he's looking for money at our house. And then the day of the crime, $150 is apparently missing from my mom's purse, and she's murdered. And so things started falling into place. So I wrote a letter to the detective begging him to come see me. He came out on April 1st, April Fool's Day, and interviewed me and took down all of my information, and then went and found that Mike Ryan had gone back to Gulfport, Mississippi. He was already in custody for another attempted burglary of a woman's home. And despite all this stuff, by now the detective had authored a 13-page police report in which he lied time and time again, making it seem like I was the only viable suspect. And then he signed his name to it under penalty of perjury, right? And he'd already submitted that. So he could either go and interview Ryan and go, fuck, this is obviously the guy. I completely screwed one of my first homicide cases up. I'm not a good detective at all. Or I lied. And he wasn't going to see either of those because he's an arrogant bastard. And he, to this day, is just arrogant. Horrible. When he found him in custody and actually went out and interviewed him, what Mike Ryan did, before being told that the murder happened anywhere near 11 o'clock in the morning, I arrived there probably 10 or 15 after 11, and I made my first call for help at 11:26. So it was right around there because her injuries were so severe. It couldn't have been a whole lot earlier, but it was in the 11 o'clock hour or 10 something. Mike Ryan volunteers that 11 a.m. he was checking into a Hollywood motel without being told of the time. And then volunteering that after he checked in, he went out and bounced around on the streets of Hollywood, and he got into a knife fight with some black guy, and he stabbed this black guy in the shoulder with a little knife that he was carrying. And so thus establishing a blood alibi for anybody who saw blood on him. The detective, as shitty as the detective was, he actually did do one thing. He went down to the motel. He found out what motel he checked into, and he got the motel registration slip by that point in time. 3 p.m. he checked in. And so 4 hours is plenty of time to commit a murder, manage to find yourself, 12 miles down the road in Hollywood, and then establish a blood alibi for all this other stuff. And his money didn't stretch with all the expenses that he noted making, which was not even enough really to survive on. So his story is not believable for a number of reasons. So the detective went out to Gulfport, Mississippi, came back, told the prosecutor, I convincingly cleared Mike Ryan. The actual words he used. Convincingly cleared him through further investigation. Total bullshit. So I'm sitting in Sylmar Juvenile Hall. I'm in boys ICU because they didn't have the compound there. It's a high security place. So they kept 187s in boys ICU and then shipped them to Eastlake. The following day I was taken up front to talk to a psych, and he said, so tell me how you feel about being here at Sylmar. And I was like, show me an open gate and I'll show you how I feel about being here at Sylmar. Are you kidding me? He's like, okay. And he writes something in my file and they start putting me on Mellaril. They start giving me medication every night at med call. They'd mix this stuff. It's like Thorazine. And pretty soon I was mumbling at visits. My dad's like, what, are they giving you something? What are you? And so I was unable to really work on my case other than writing that letter with my dad's help to Monsu and then telling Monsu everything that I knew. So I was in juvenile hall until my juvenile detention and fitness hearing. Monsu showed up and lied and said that there was blood spatter pattern on a yellow t-shirt that I was wearing that indicated that to him, with his training and expertise, that I was standing over my mother at the moment she received one or more of her fatal blows, which is total bullshit. In fact, the state's bloodstain expert that later looked at the things found that there was no blood at all on the yellow t-shirt. Just lied about everything. So got me held over, got me bound over in juvenile court. And then the juvenile court found me fit on all counts except for the seriousness of the commitment offense. It was a horrible murder. It was a bludgeoning and a stabbing, and there was a piece of yellow cord around her throat when I found her. So it was 3 different modes of attack protracted throughout the house. It was a horrible, horrible crime. She must have been in incredible terror. But the court said, I order that you remain here in juvenile hall and given a haircut. So before I was given a haircut, and a day or 2 later in the dark of night, I was taken over a superior court order out of juvenile hall and placed in the snitch tank at the adult LA County Jail. 17 years old. I wasn't an adult yet. I was placed in an adult section with 4 canine, that's informant classified adults, 2 on either side of me. I still get kind of protective of the 17-year-old that I was, It's like he's a different kid, like he's a different guy, and I'm really protective of that kid. And those fuckers, the police that did what they want, because that transfer order didn't come out of, that wasn't just a mistake. The LA County grand jury convened in 1989 on the issue of jailhouse informant testimony. And they issued a report, 150 pages, that so clearly described what happened to me. And it details that cops on cases, detectives like Monsu, not sure he did it, but it would fit. If somebody called and said, oh, we'd prefer if he was placed in that snitch tank over there. Because almost invariably, when somebody who's not an informant got placed in that section of the jail, it was a signal to the informants in there that they were to try to book him, try to work on him, try to get information out of him that they could then later raise their hand and say, he confessed to me. Oh, really, Mr. Informant? What did he tell you? And they could pass muster as being truthful by having facts that so-called only the killer would know. And I fell into that one because there were 3 jailhouse informants that attempted to claim that I confessed to them. The first 2 were so patently, obviously liars and just really unsophisticated, just scumbags. The police were like, nah, get out of here. And then the third one, Robert Hughes, was a cunning liar who in the span of 18 months had come forward. I was his 4th homicide case that he came forward claiming that somebody confessed him. He really conned me. He was like, did this whole Jesus Bible bullshit rap with me. We'll Bible study together. The Lord gives me a good, a strong feeling you'll be going home soon. These are letters that he wrote to me that were read into evidence in my case. He also said, I'll help you with your case, because I've been in and out before I turned my life around and became an upstanding Christian. I've been in and out a number of times, so I could probably help you with your case if you wanted. And I was like, okay. Rolled up my police reports and sent them through the hole in the wall. He wrote down every salient fact. He wrote down, what was funny too, is he wrote them down in order. And the order that the weapons were described being observed in the house, and the order of all these things observed in the house, which he then later claimed was the order of attack, was just the order that the police encountered them when they walked through, and was actually physically impossible when you looked at various injuries. Like, she had defensive slash wounds to her left hand only, and she had a right fractured humerus. Well, logically, one can infer that that happened first, otherwise why wouldn't you have defense on both hands? And so I fell right into what was going on. I was not a savvy criminal. I was not a criminal at all. And I fell right into the traps that corrupt police and corrupt jailhouse informants set. So there was also a point at which I attempted a guilty plea, because prior to Robert Hughes' coming forward, I was charged with first-degree murder. The penalty for that is, you're going to do 17 2/3 years of your base 25 before you even see the board. With Robert Hughes and all of the lies that Detective Monsi were telling, I was looking at first-degree murder as a pretty likely possibility. A friend of my father's, who was also an attorney, came down to the juvenile hall, and because it was being suggested that I entertain a guilty plea and go to youth authority, which is what the judge said that he would do for a couple of years, and then go home. And I was completely resistant to that. I'm not going to plead guilty to something I'm going to do. So this attorney comes down, Bob Johnson comes down, and I remember the day like it was yesterday. It was a sunny day. There was a breeze blowing across the yard. He got permission to talk to me privately. We just sat on a bench that used to be outside under a tree underneath one of the units. My unit was having recreation over there, and we sat off to the side, and he said, and I remember the words exactly, I could almost smell his breath on me. He got so close. I was saying, no, I'm not going to do it. He said, look, they're going to convict you of first fucking degree murder unless you plead guilty to this. And I still get chills. Here was my dad. My dad loved me and stood by me 100%, always. And so did Bob. And here he was telling me that I had to go in and say that I killed my mom to save myself. So I just went, okay, look, I have to default to trust. I have to trust my dad. I have to trust Bob. And, my dad had been to war. Bob had been to war. This is my war. The normal rules aren't applying here at all. And so I agreed to, and I went in, we attempted to do that. Pled guilty. Got sent for an observation in YA. And the psychiatric staff there just eviscerated me. First of all, if you didn't do something and I ask, how'd you do it? You're kind of at a loss. So I'm trying to invent a story that's consistent with the evidence that I'm aware of exists in the police report. But I'm 18 years old, and the element of if you'd done something, having remorse, or at least looking like you had done it or whatever. So something wasn't ringing true for them. And they wrote that I showed no remorse. And they wrote this terrible report. So I wasn't amenable to treatment at the youth authority because they knew it'd be a few years and then they would have to release me before my 25th birthday. So they wrote a dispositive report, and the judge said, well, I have no idea. I'll allow you to take back your plea and you can go ahead with trial. I can't sentence you to YA. I'll sentence you to state prison or let you take your plea. So I was like, okay. So took it back, went ahead with trial, and the lying detective got on stand, and the lying jailhouse informant got on the stand, and they were just, My attorney was like, I'm not putting you on the stand. And so the jury didn't get to hear from me. I don't know if that would have done any good, but I could only, think that it would have, but who knows? And then flashing forward like years later, like the footwear impressions, the detective got up on the stand and said that bloody shoe prints seen in the house and shoe prints in the mud outside quite closely resembled the soles on my sneakers. That's not a match. And so he skirted this, and my attorney was so substandard. He had a signed order of the court authorizing funds for our own footwear impression expert, never sent the evidence to them. Had he done so, the same result would have come that came just before 2005. Mine were where I said they would be. And the prosecutor in closing argument said, Bruce Lisker says he didn't do it, that it was another intruder. Where's evidence of the intruder? Where? There's none. It's only Bruce Lisker's shoe prints in the mud. It's only his shoe prints in the house. Here they are. It's crazy.
Tragically, that evidence would stay hidden for decades. Bruce's case would go to trial, and he would be convicted of second-degree murder and carry a life sentence.
So what my dad did and what I did, what worked to my detriment in keeping the police reports with me when I was in juvenile hall and then going to adult, the snitch tank and having them there, in the long term worked out for me because retention of everything is very important. My dad kept everything, and I started having things sent in to me, and I started poring over absolutely everything. So if a detective made a note, handwritten note, and then wrote that into a typed up report, and then went and testified to that at the Dennis H. hearing, and then went and testified to that at the prelim, and then at the trial, and then at trial number 2, then there's like 6 different places where they're referencing the same event or observation, piece of evidence. And if they're telling the truth, there's going to be some consistency. And if they're lying their asses off, there's going to be some inconsistency. And what I was able to do, it took a decade or more, was to create about a 60-page document with like 700 plus footnotes called the Lisker case analysis, creatively enough, where I documented every discrepancy that I was able to find in my case. And it's important not just to go, they lied. It's important to say, on or about this date, they said this in a footnote, because nobody's going to believe you sitting in a jail cell. You got to document everything. And I did. And so I had this enormous document with all these footnotes, which I was then able to authoritatively discuss my case and demonstrate, what my case was about to anybody that I might be able to get some interest with and to bring onto the case. The first attorney that I hired, he's since surrendered his bar credentials. It was a guy named Gary Diamond, and Mr. Diamond took $7,500 from me and said that he was writing a petition for writ of habeas corpus on my behalf. I sent it to him, Lisker case analysis, and I found that he was just wasting my time. He wasted 2 years of my life. And then the next attorney that I hired, I sent, I think, $94,000 to. So the initial amount I was going to pay him, and then the amount went up and it went up again. And then he asked for a personal loan from me, and I gave him a personal loan, and then he died. And he wasted another 2 years of my life. And I was out of money by that point. But he introduced me to a private investigator who had worked on the Pomona Police Department for 10 years and then was retired and became a PI, named Paul Ingalls. And Paul Ingalls was one of the first heaven sent angels in my case. He took this case on and wouldn't give up even after I ran out of money. But one of the things he noted was it was taking Fred a long time to file. The California State Bar, as you know, maintains something called the Client Security Fund. It's out of dues of attorneys that are paying their dues. They keep this fund in case clients are treated poorly by California Bar certified attorneys. They could be reimbursed. So he calls Fred and he says, "What's going on?" "Yeah, I misused some of the funds. I used them to buy diapers and other stuff. And I'm going to get on it. I'm on this thing." But he admitted to misappropriation of client funds. And so the bar's Client Security Fund found that he had misappropriated state funds. They appointed the largest amount that they can, $50,000, and gave me a check back for $50,000. My third set of attorneys, another guy who with questionable morals, as it turns out, this particular attorney had somebody working for him named David Bernstein who wrote exceptional paper. And he wrote a petition for writ of habeas corpus that got me an evidentiary hearing in 2005. And 2005 was also about the time that the LA Times were publishing their first of ultimately 50 or 60 some articles. When I ran out of money, this attorney was finally reminded that he said he was going to take me all the way. And I scraped together like $9,000. And that was the last that I could afford. And I sent it to him. And he said, okay, I'll take you all the way. Well, he kept sending me these bills. And he said, don't worry. It's just a means of me keeping track so I could be later reimbursed from the court. Won't come from you. He made a lien, and they wouldn't settle with me until I settled my thing with him. And so while I owed him absolutely nothing according to our agreement, he had sent me bills in the amount of $150,000 or something. And it was ridiculous. It was exorbitant. Every time I wrote to David, the boss would bill as if he read the thing and did this. He billed this. So I was paying double billable hours. And he said, oh, no, you never have to. And then he made a claim and ultimately settled with him for a lot of money. As a life prisoner, every time you go to a board hearing, you have a right to what's called an Olson review, which is a review of your central file for all information that they're going to be considering during the hearing, which in effect, in practical purposes, is your entire file. So you get to sit there and read everything except for the confidential entries. And when you're a life prisoner, the arresting agency and the prosecuting agency are both solicited as to their opinion as to whether or not you would be a good risk of parole if paroled. And every time, invariably, that no, there's a terrible risk. Don't. And Monsu would be solicited every time I'd go to board. And he'd be like, his first letters back to the Board of Prison Terms were, because he's a functional illiterate, he's a malaprop. Every fifth word is misspelled. It's like, I should never be released to prey, P-R-A-Y, on society. So he's writing these letters. And one of these letters that I didn't see until the next time I went to board said, years after this crime had been committed. Because remember, I didn't commit the crime, so I didn't have any money on me when the police arrived. Mike Ryan apparently had taken it and used it for various whatever. So this is a loose end, and that doesn't really sit well with somebody like Monsu, I don't think. And so he lied in this letter to the parole board saying, years after the crime was committed, the new owners of the house had contacted me and said that they found $150, which was the amount believed stolen in the attack, hidden in the attic space above Bruce Lisker's old bedroom, thus confirming our theory of the crime and removing all doubt as to his guilt. And I'm looking at this and going, this is bullshit. Mike Ryan did not stop. We didn't even have one of those like pull down, climb up the ladder kind of attic accesses. We had a square thing. They had to go out to the garage, get a ladder, bring it in, set it up, take the square thing out, climb up in this thing, go over 20 feet to where my bedroom is and hide it over my bed. He didn't do that. There's no way somebody who just murdered my mom and is covered with blood or whatever he was and wanting to get the hell out of Dodge is going to do that. So I contacted Paul. I said, this is BS. It has to be. This is bull. He goes, I'm on it. He contacted it through a deed search, all the subsequent owners of the house, and interviewed them one by one. One by one, they're like, we never found anything, never told police that we did, never. So he writes this letter to the parole board, and I find it in my file, and I get a copy of it, and I send it to Paul, and he does all the investigation. He gets declarations. We file a complaint of employee misconduct with the LAPD. Paul tells me to. And I'm like, they're not going to, it's scary to take on, you're like going to give the giant a freaking bloody nose. What's he going to do to you? But what do I have to lose? What choice do I have, right? And so Paul's like, look, you got to do it. You filed this thing. And we filed it. And it got assigned to an honest cop named Jim Gavin, who did almost a year's worth of investigation. An officer with a claim against them has a statutory right to have it wrapped up within a year, unless he waives it, he or she waives it. He didn't waive it. So it was a year. It's approaching a year. This Gavin did really amazing work. He came up to the prison and interviewed me for hours twice with a partner. I said, I'm an open book. Anything you want, you got. And we handed everything over that we had. He had a bunch because he's in LAPD. He's the one who noted the thing in the photographs, of the autopsy photographs, and had it sent to the footwear impression expert, who looked at not only the bloody shoe print in the house and the muddy shoe prints on the side of the house, but also a newly discovered imprint that nobody had seen on the back of my mom's scalp. I was excluded from the ones that didn't match my shoe prints in the mud, and I was excluded from the bloody ones, and I was excluded from the shoe print on the back of my mom's scalp, all of which were made by the same shoe. Nevertheless, LAPD got wind of the direction that he was going with it and yanked it from Gavin within like weeks of that year and sent me a letter saying it was unfounded. My complaints were unfounded. And despite their not having been able to assail at all the declarations of the subsequent homeowners, despite regular procedure for locating $150 from a murder case is to book it into evidence, haven't been booked into evidence. This is a fucking lie. So Paul Ingalls, the former Pomona cop, is offended by corruption, as is Gavin. Personally, takes it real personal because he was an honest cop. And so he went, fuck this, and went to the LA Times and said, I've got a case that's going to blow your doors off. Are you interested? And they were like, yeah. So then they came on and started investigating things. Initially, they were thinking, man, a few weeks, we'll probably have an article one way or the other. We don't know, but it's not going to take that long. 8 months plus later, a massive investigation. 8 months, interviewing virtually everybody, going over thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of transcript, trying to poke holes in what I was saying, in what Paul was saying. They bring me into their classes, the reporters now. They teach a journalism class at USC, and they bring me in periodically. And these guys, they tell the class, look, the number one thing, we're trying to poke a hole. Find a place where he lied to us. Because game over, right? He's a liar. We can't trust anything now. Never once lied to them, never would, never had to. Open book, just like with Gavin. And, they came to an amazing article. It won an award. The first article just blew the doors off of this fake case that LAPD just manufactured against me. The overturning comes in two broad stages. One is a report and recommendation that your conviction be overturned by a magistrate. And then you wait while the district judge themselves reviews the R&R and determines whether or not they're going to sign it into the order of the district court. And so that period was mercifully short. It could have gone on I don't know if there's even a hard limit, but it didn't go on a long ways, but it went on obviously too long for me. But the R&R was amazing. And we were like, it's definitely gonna, and it's just inconceivable that the district judge would go, no, that's all wrong. He assailed all of the evidence, magistrate. At the point that was done, we found out that the district attorney was going to proceed on the original information and take me back to trial. And so I had to post federal bond to get out. And so that was done. And then the orders to release me were going to come they had to go from the court to Sacramento, and Sacramento had to transmit them to the prison itself. And that was a blurry day or two or three. But I knew the night before that I was definitely going home. I knew the night of August 12th, 2009, that I was definitely leaving this place that I had lived in for 19 years. I had spent, I think I figured it out, a sum total of 53 nights for the evidentiary hearing in 2005 away from Mule Creek State Prison, where I'd lived for 19 years. So it was this, 19 years minus 53 nights I'd gone to sleep in that place, that 6.5 acres of C facility. And to go to sleep going, tomorrow, I'm going to be walking that orange laundry cart with all my stuff in it, everything I own, walking out that gate. So I'm going to be going through that, checked out, and walking out the front I didn't even know how to relate to that. I'd started thinking of things like life prisoners who've been in a long time do. There's this drift. You don't have an active, functional memory of what it feels like to be free. You have an image that drifts over time. But it was a trip. I had I don't want to say easy adjustment, but I had my dad who had passed, but I had his legacy of like, hey, Bruce is a wonderful human being, and Joy, her heart connection with me. I had a community of people that were their friends, chosen family, that close. And I had this huge community of people who were incredibly supportive to welcome me home and to assure that I wouldn't fall through the cracks. When I had to post federal bond, I had my sister, my stepsister, Joy's daughter, and my cousin, like putting up their houses, like in an instant. So I had it a lot easier, if that's the right word, than a lot of people do. I had a lot of benefits that a lot of people don't. And yet still, like when I was looking for a job, I turned in 50 job applicant forms. And I answered truthfully, have you ever been arrested for a crime? Yes, because I had been arrested. If so, what? California PC 187 murder. Exonerated 2009, I would write in right next to it. I didn't get a single call back. I got a job through a relative of mine, like the son of my godparents, both of whom had passed, but he was still in the film industry doing film restoration and stuff in Hollywood. And I got a job through him. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't have had that job. So it's hard. It's hard for people who have had everything. I mean, because look what happens when you get arrested in such a situation. You are literally stripped naked and passed into this new world that you have never been less adept at dealing with. Everything out here goes away, including your reputation, including your good name. You exist for decades usually in there before things get made right. People have died. Everything is different. There's that drift. It's no wonder a lot of people don't do as well as I did. The hardest thing is having lost people. Because people are irreplaceable. Having lost my mom, having lost my dad, having lost my stepmom. When the first LA Times article dropped on May 22nd, 2005, Detective Montu was in charge of 63 other detectives in the Wilshire Division, I believe. And he read the article, and he was already on I think it's called the drop program, where you retire and start collecting and then you come back to work another year or two or three or whatever. And then so you get like this compounding effect and you get this extra kind of retirement. He forfeited that. He walked out and he said, I don't need this shit. And he grabbed his, a uniform shirt or something and threw it in the trash can and walked out the door. And he didn't work another day, thank God. But unfortunately, he still got his full pension, never saw the inside of a jail cell. Because what he did, in effect, I don't consider him an officer. I consider him a criminal who stole a badge under false pretenses, saying that he was going to abide by the law and uphold the Constitution and all the things whatever you swear it's a liar. So he didn't deserve a dime. But that's my opinion. And that's not just my opinion. A lot of people feel that way. But the automatic fashion with which he just kicked into like acting this way tells me it didn't happen in a vacuum. This isn't his first rodeo. He's done this before. And the league into which he fell with the informant, I mean, there are handwritten notes about, what the informant likes. He likes Camel cigs and candy bars and the way that he was like befriended by this detective. It was apparent in court, in their demeanor, in the way that they interacted, and they're of the same ilk, in my opinion. And the informant is an absolute scumbag who victimized a 17-year-old child. He's a child abuser. And so is the detective. After I came home, I began volunteering with an outfit called Inside Out Writers that would do volunteer creative writing classes inside LA County juvenile halls. And I had a class at Los Padrinos in Downey. And my students, not surprisingly, were the same age that I was. They were like 14, 15, 16, 17. And I would look at these kids and I'd go, my God, I couldn't for the life of me imagine treating a 17-year-old child in one of the dozens of ways that that detective and that informant treated me. It's just inconceivable. It's just, I don't know how you do that. And then as far as Mike Ryan, years later, both his mom and his dad, who were estranged and not sort of on even speaking terms at that point, both signed sworn declarations saying they thought their son committed a murder that I was sitting in prison for. And you just don't get that. Mike Ryan committed suicide in 1996, and he was living in somebody's garage. And he left a note saying thanks to the guy who was letting him stay in his garage and sorry to his mom and fuck everyone else. And I have to think that not being mentioned in his note, I am included in that group of everyone else. So he did. He lived selfish and he went out selfish. So like when we dream, our dreams are like a nighttime churn of daily events. And my metaphor for adversity is always in the dreamscape prison. And so like if I have like this thing that I come up against or whatever, and it's a challenge, I'm finding it challenging, invariably I'll have like a prison dream that night. They're absurd. They're as absurd as dreams are, absurd and kind of with a nightmare spin on them, where you kind of like, I've arrived at prison again. I have all my property and I set it down for a second and I turn to talk to an officer and I turn back and it's gone. And I'm like, and where's my cell? And I can't find my cell and I got to get to my cell before count time. And otherwise I'm in big trouble. And it's weird. It's really weird. And then there's this other kind of prison dream that I have, and it's weird. It's like, it's just a theme that kind of comes through. Yeah, I'm doing all that. Like, where's my cell? Where's my stuff? But I'll go, why am I still in prison for this crime that I've been exonerated of? It's like it never leaves. It's like there's an echo and an impression of being called something that you know you're not, of being placed somewhere you know you don't belong, that I don't know if I'll ever get over that. That ghost of that thing that happened is probably a permanent part. For better and for worse. Because I never knew how strong I was until I had to be. And now I know.
Bruce Lisker's story is one of tragedy, perseverance, and ultimately redemption. Wrongly convicted as a teenager and forced to spend more than 2 decades behind bars, his case stands as a stark reminder of how fragile justice can be and how critical it is that we keep fighting to uncover the truth. His resilience and the work of those who helped bring his innocence to light inspire us to continue advocating for the wrongfully convicted every day. If you like what you heard, share with your friends, and tune in next time as we are joined by the LA Times reporters who broke the case and Detective Jim Gavin, who bravely exposed the flaws in the investigation. I'm Michael Semanchik, Executive Director of the Innocence Center. Thank you for listening to Bruce Lisker on For the Innocent. For the Innocent is produced by myself and Adam Lockwood. Our assistant producer is Ali Kavit. Music in this episode provided by Soundstripe. Our theme song is by Exoneration, William Michael Dillon. For the Innocent is a proud part of the Legal Talk Network, an InfoTrack company.